This was a lot, man. A lot is happening in Made in Abyss right now. The whole group is split up, every single character is going on their own journey, discovering things about the village and themselves and the other characters. It's a lot going on, and yet it's one of the things that I am loving the most out of this season so far. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to another Made in Abyss Season 2, The Golden City of the Scorching Sun episode review. Today we will be talking about Episode 4, Friend. And like I was just saying, there's actually quite a bit to talk about in this week's episode, because the series now has 3 different POVs who are all learning pretty important stuff to the narrative and to the overall mysteries of the series. And starting off, I guess we can talk about the most prominent side in this episode. I would say the one that brings up the most questions, but honestly, every side in this episode brings up a lot of questions. But I think this is the side that a lot of people will be coming away from this episode wondering about, and that is the relationship between Reg and Faputa. Now, according to her, Reg has had a previous dynamic and relationship with Faputa before he lost his memories, and that in itself isn't really that out of the question. I mean, Reg had to have been doing something down here before he ended up making his way to the surface, but it gets more interesting when you find out that Reg actually was already known as Reg down here by Faputa before he even met Rico. And that is where the questions start to arise. Is it just some freak coincidence that he happened to be named Reg twice? Does it have to do with Liza and her naming him down here, which Rico happened to copy later on down the line? Is it fate? Is it destiny? We do know that Rico had a dog named Reg as well, so if I were to just theorycraft here a little bit, maybe when that dog eventually died, Rico sent a nameplate down into the abyss for the funeral, and maybe Liza or Reg or somebody else happened to see it when naming him. I honestly have no idea what the explanation could be, but it already raises some pretty interesting questions. And speaking of interesting, I am looking forward to uncovering what kind of relationship Reg and Faputa had in the past, because they have an interesting conversation this episode where Faputa talks about how Reg is going to outlive Rico if they live in the same time now. And not only does this kind of imply that Faputa considers Reg this kind of destined partner to live in immortality with, it's pretty easy to guess that she probably feels pretty lonely right now. But the way it's worded is also interesting, with the way she talks about living in the same time. We've known in the series for a while about something called the 2,000-year cycle, where something happens in the abyss and it changes. And we also know that Bondrewd was trying to turn himself into a hollow to prepare for whenever that cycle ended up happening. So to me, all of this dialogue and what we know about the series so far basically gets across that something is coming. Something is going to happen. Faputa knows about it, and she's asking Reg if he's choosing to live whatever happens with Rico in the future. A lot of interesting implications and dialogue between those two there. There was one more detail in this section that really caught my eye, which is when Reg goes out into the abyss, he sees all the flower petals of fortitude falling down, all of the nameplates from on top of the abyss scattered around, and there's one in particular that says, Shirumi cycles and returns to the netherworld. Now, that might just come across as a random name for someone who's died on the surface, but in the manga, there's actually an entire side story to Shirumi's character that, while is pretty disconnected from everything else in the main story, I still found it to be a really wonderful little story that expands on the surface, expands this character and the dynamic really nicely in a way that I would love to eventually see adapted in the anime. I'll avoid talking about it for now, since I think they very well could adapt it later, maybe even in the very next episode we'll get this. But if they don't, I'll talk about it later, because I do think it's a really nice story and anime-onlys would be missing out on it. Now, let's get into some of the other perspectives in this episode, and with Rico's POV, there's only one thing I really need to say here. Stranger danger, my dude. Stranger goddamn danger. I flip-flop back and forth throughout this series so frequently between thinking Rico is just the smartest girl you could possibly send on an adventure like this, and then there's times like these where I'm just thinking to myself, Riko, what in the hell are you thinking being led into this alleyway by giant scary looking monsters? What are you doing, my girl? I actually was kind of worried about this section being adapted just because I wasn't a huge fan of it in the manga. It felt like Akihito was just being Akihito and inserting his weird fetishes where they didn't belong, but I will say that I think they actually handled it pretty well in the anime. They toned it down enough where the intent and the scariness factor is still very prevalently felt. I mean, the animation and the drawings during that scene were exceptional in really making you feel that terror that Riko was probably feeling. But at the same time, unlike in the manga, it didn't feel overly indulgent in the more pandery aspects, and I would show pages from the manga to compare, but showing them would probably get me delisted on YouTube. Other than that though, Riko's POV uncovered a few things that I will talk about by the end of the review, but more importantly, it still kept that wonderful atmosphere and vibe of the village that I have been loving from last week. I can't overstate enough how much I love how they're adapting this location and how engrossing it is to watch. Seriously though, they really need a new pooping sound effect. I mean, surely this is not the best pooping sound effect that they have in the studio. The last section I want to talk about is obviously Nanachi's, but even more than that, I just want to talk about a lot of the questions that are raised by the end of this episode, and not even necessarily discuss answers, because I don't have all the answers. I'm gonna be blind on this story pretty soon myself, so it's more of just bringing up these questions, and I'm curious what you guys think are the answers to them. First and most prominently, what in the hell is Mitty doing back alive? And back alive on the 6th layer, I might add. Is there some kind of resurrection power down here? Did Mitty have a twin? Is this just some other hollow that Nanachi is projecting onto? There's a lot of different explanations, so I'm not even going to really bother diving into this right now, but more importantly, it brings up the existence of the 3 sages in this village. If it wasn't by now, it should totally be 100% transparent that the 3 sages and all of the crew from that expedition in the flashback are still trapped here now, however many years later. Bueko seems to be trapped somewhere by some goo monsters, more on that in a bit. Wazukian is just enjoying some testicles at the restaurant, and Belaf here is the giant snake-looking angel thing that has been holding on to Mitty. This is why I mentioned in one of the other episode reviews how interesting and cool of a decision it was to put that flashback before starting the 6th layer and getting to this village, because now it completely recontextualizes what these Monster Hollow 3 sages are, and it stirs your imagination into wondering how all of this even happened to begin with. What went down here before they got turned into these things? On a side note, unfortunately, I know I have been a CG defender these past few weeks. I think Majikaja's CG looks pretty good and it fits into the world, but I have to say that I am a little disappointed that Belaf is also completely CG. It's not even him being CG itself, it's just the quality that looks kinda weird in this scene, and I can't even write it off the same way that I did Majikaja, because this is actually supposed to be this very organic, soft, otherworldly creature, and it just ends up looking really robotic and weird. I don't know, it's not a huge deal, but it definitely took me out of that final scene a little bit. It wasn't all questions and mysteries in this week's episode though. We did get quite a few answers and revelations to things that have been kind of in the back of our mind over the past few episodes. For one, I'm happy and sad to report that we got an answer to one of the questions and theories that I brought up in last week's episode. However, the sad part is that I was kind of mistaken in what I thought was the explanation for it. In fact, they basically just say I was wrong in what I said. Last week, I brought up how the balancing in this village didn't take place until Riko had screamed out about how Manya's worth could not be determined, and I basically used this as an explanation for how the balancing perceives worth in this village. I wasn't completely wrong about how people's perception and feelings are what determine it, but it's not something as simple as just speaking aloud how much they're worth to you. We found out in one of the beginning village episodes about how this village almost resembles a living organism, and that is further backed up by the fact that this village and the balancing itself can look into a person's heart and soul and determine how much something is worth to them. This is how it determines worth in this village, and I guess the reason why it waits for people to scream out is just because it has a knack for complying to dramatic scenes. With regards to the balancing, by the end of the episode, we close on a shot of someone who just appears to be a naked Vueko, and she is surrounded by these purple goo monsters that have been responsible for the balancing so far. So the natural assumption, seeing this shot here, is either A, she's being held captive here by the balancing monsters for whatever reason, maybe she's paying a debt or paying some worth, or B, she herself is the one who controls them and controls the balancing. I have a feeling we're going to get into that next episode, but it definitely raises an interesting question because unlike Belaf, unlike Wazukian, unlike Faputa, Vueko seems to be pretty intact with her humanity. She hasn't been turned into a giant monster thing, unless just these dark goo monsters are a part of her and that is her transformation. I don't know. Unlike the rest of the group, it's possible that she just didn't have any desires that would transform her in that way, or maybe there's just another explanation altogether. Either way, great episode yet again. Masan is the best. Protect my goddamn child. The animation felt a lot better than usual. Props to the anime team for this week. Music was still great, although I did think it was a little randomly placed at times. I don't know why they just started playing this grand heavenly track like Hanaziv while Reg is just taking a walk in the abyss, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. Let me know any other thoughts, questions, mysteries, or theories that you might have in the comments below. Join the Discord server in the description if you want to hang out and chat and talk about Made in Abyss or whatever else. I love you all, and I will see you in the next video.